Today's daf we're learning is the daf for Shabbat. We're learning today daf Mem Tet. Today's daf is dedicated by Tzipi Wolkenfeld. Tzipi wishes a Fuash Lema for Yakira Liba Batsara Gita. Thank you, dearest Kiki, for inspiring us and many others to grow in learning mitzvot, Yirat Shamayim, and Emunah. May you continue to grow stronger and stronger. Love, Safta, and Zaidi. Okay, we're going to start from the very top of Mem Tet. Arba'a Asar Mishnah. Arba'a Asar Shechal Yop Shabbat. Okay, appropriate. We're both learning this on Shabbat and we're learning it on the year where this is exactly going to happen, which is the 14th of Pesach comes out on Shabbat. Erev Pesach on Shabbat. So what do we do? What do we do particularly with burning the chametz? We already learned you're supposed to burn the chametz at around 11 o'clock on Erev Pesach. So what do we do if it happens on Shabbat? According to Rabbi Meir, we burn everything before Shabbat. Okay, you take care of everything. Some people say this means you burn it in the afternoon, like just before Shabbat. Some people say we do it the same time as we do it every year, because otherwise people will get confused and say, hey, last year we did it in the afternoon, so this year we can also do it in the afternoon, and therefore we keep it at the same time. Chachamim say, no, you get rid of the chametz at its regular time, meaning just to clarify, Rabbi Meir would think that since you have to burn everything before, all you leave over, presumably he thinks this, although I'll tell you another opinion in a minute, presumably he thinks that you leave only what you need for the first 2 meals of the day, right? Chametz that you need for the first 2 meals because you need to eat bread for your meals. You can't eat matzah because it's Erev Pesach. Some people actually claim that he says, oh no, you actually get rid of everything and you eat matzah on Erev Pesach, which is interesting because normally we wouldn't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. It's a unique approach, but there is somebody who understands it that way. Chachamim omrim bizmano, no, you do it at the regular time. Now, how do you do that? You can't burn the chametz, but if you remember, there was a machloket, you have to burn it, or can you get rid of it in some other way? So he just means you eat it. You make sure to eat it all, okay? Or find someone else to eat it, or give it away, or somehow throw it to the wind, let the birds eat it, get rid of it. Many people think that he doesn't think that you have to leave over only 2 meals worth. You could leave over even more because you could somehow manage to get rid of it. Truma specifically, you have to get rid of before Shabbat. Why is that? Because you might not find a Kohen to eat it. Let's say you invite a Kohen for Kiddush on Shabbos morning. You have it all planned out, and then the Kohen doesn't show up. Okay, we had this once. We had it. I remember we were in a hotel, and my father didn't show up for Kiddush. And luckily it wasn't Truma food, right? We managed, we just all ate a little bit more food. But I seem to remember something like that happening. And, we had to make sure that we somehow got rid of the food. But chulin bismanan, if they're, right, so regular food you can leave. It's Truma that's a problem. It's a funny story because my father's a Kohen. So good, we don't eat Truma nowadays. Because if I had saved Truma food for him and he didn't show up, we really would have been stuck because we can't eat Truma, but he can. The Gemara brings a Braita, Tanya, Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok Omer, Pam Achat Shavat Abba b'Yavne. He spent Shabbat in Yavne. V'chal Arba'a Asar Liyot b'Shabbat. So it was exactly like this year. Uva Zunin Mimuneh shel Rabban Gamliel v'Amar Higia et leva'er et hachametz. V'alachti achar Abu bi'arnu et hachametz. So they said, Zunin, who was the guy in charge of Rabban Gamliel, he came and said, hey, it's time to get rid of the chametz. What does this seem to prove? It's not 100% clear why they brought this, but it seems to prove that there's a specific time to get rid of the chametz on Erev Pesach also. And that's what they did. They got rid of the chametz. If you remember, there was all machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, whether it has to specifically be burned. So some people think that Rabbi Meir, who holds you have to do it before Shabbat, it's because he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that it all has to be burned. Not everybody agrees with that interpretation. As I mentioned already, there's a lot of different ways of understanding this Mishnah. Next Mishnah. If you're on your way either to slaughter a korban pesach, or to give a brit milah to your son, or to go eat a festive meal for an engagement. Okay, engagement is, again, not engagement the way we have nowadays, but engagement was what we call kiddushin, that we do under the chuppah before we do the sheva bracha, which is the nisuin, but the kiddushin is the first part. So to go eat a sudat erusin in your father-in-law's house. And all of a sudden you remember, wait, I'm on my way to do this mitzvah, but I realized I forgot to get rid of chametz in my house. So what do? right? You're a little bit struggling. You have a mitzvah to get rid of your chametz, but you're also on your way to do a mitzvah. This is a classic sugya of ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. If you're already doing one mitzvah, you're possibly exempt from another mitzvah. Question is how so and in what circumstances? And here it's more of a problem because you actually have chametz in your house. So if you have enough time to go home, get rid of your chametz, go back, do the mitzvah, and you can still do it, then great. But if not, you can just nullify it in your heart. Okay, meaning you can just say bitul and you're done. This is because there's an alternate option here, right? You have a way out, right? What's your way out? That you can just do bitul. So therefore, it's okay. What if you're saving someone from Gentiles? Okay, we're talking about a case where Gentiles are running after someone to kill them and you want to save them. Umin hanahar, or someone's drowning. Umin listim, where there's a robber, right? These robbers were usually, the listim were very rough and tough, right? We're not talking just someone stealing your money, but someone's beating you up or something. Umin adlika, or from a fire. Umin amapolet, or an avalanche. Yivatel belibo. So again, you're busy with that. You're allowed to just nullify. But if you're on your way to put up an eruv to get out of the tchum, remember eruvim, if you want to leave 2,000 amma outside the city, you have to put down, right? You want to go more than 2,000 cubits, so you put down your food in an area, and then you can go from there. So if it's to do it for reshut purposes, not for a mitzvah, then yachzor miyad, then you immediately go home. That's not enough of a mitzvah. Now, some of them are first from comment that if you remember when we learned in Masechet Eruvin, we learned that you can only do Eruv Tchumen if it's for the purpose of a mitzvah. So here the rabbis start to distinguish the Mefarshim. Maybe there's a difference what kind of mitzvah. There's mitzvahs of high-level mitzvahs and there's mid-level mitzvahs, like going to your rabbi's house or doing something which is somewhat like a mitzvah, but not exactly like a mitzvah. And that's why they call it Reshut, and it must be this in between. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense with what we learned that it has to be le dvar mitzvah mamash. So there's different examples. I don't remember all of them that they bring for what could be reshut that's sort of a mitzvah. Or maybe if I think I recall that there was an opinion that it doesn't only have to be le dvar mitzvah, and then you can explain it like that. Okay, now likewise, we're going to have another situation where you might have to go back for something. This time, it's not going to be chametz. It's a different issue. You leave Jerusalem, b'niskar sheyesh biyado basar kodesh. All of a sudden you remember, you realize, oh my goodness, look what I'm holding in my hand. I'm holding sanctified meat. Okay, what happens? The issue is you can't take sanctified meat outside Jerusalem. I'm thinking this happens to me once in a while. I'm very distracted and I go into a store and I'm getting some fruits and vegetables and I put some stuff on my arm, right? The bag on my wrist. And I have a few other things in my hand and I put down the things in my hand on the counter and I walk out and all of a sudden I realize that I've taken the fruits out of the store and I walked away with them without actually paying. Right? It's not exactly the same, obviously, but here we're dealing with Basar Kodesh, but you basically left, and let's say I've made it all the way home. Do I have to go back to the store and deal with it, right? So here, the issue is a totally different issue. It just made me think of it. But what do you have here? You basically have, I've left Jerusalem and I have this Basar Kodesh. Now, at this point, the Basar Kodesh is disqualified because you took it out. It needs to be burnt. However, it's supposed to be burnt in Jerusalem. So im avar tzofim, if you already passed the place of tzofim, which is either Har Tzofim, Mount Scopus, or which is a place where you could still see the temple, or it just means any place where you could still see the temple. Maybe tzofim is not a particular location, but it just means anywhere where you could still see. If you've already gone beyond that, sorfo b'mkomo, you're allowed to burn it where you are. But if not, you have to go back and burn it in front of the bira. Okay, the bira is no, I think it's the term for the harabayit, if I remember correctly, from the atzei hamaracha, from the wood that was used on the maracha, on the altar. V'ad kama hem chosrin. Now, for how much do you have to go back? How much chametz? How much basar kodesh? So Rabbi Meir omer zeh v'zeh b'kibeitza. Rabbi Yehuda omer zeh v'zeh b'kezayit. According to Rabbi Meir, it's only if you have a kibeitza, which is double the amount of a kezayit. Right, the size of an egg rather than the size of an olive bulb. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, even the size of an olive bulb, you have to go back. Again, only under the circumstances that you actually have to go back. The Chachamim omrim basal kodesh b'kezayit b'chametz b'kibetza. Chachamim have a third opinion. They distinguish between sanctified meat, which is only a kezayit, and chametz, which they would say is a kibetza. Okay, chametz is going to be larger. Okay, a greater amount. Why is that? So different opinions are brought. Right. So one of the explanations is that kizayit bekibetza, it has to be a larger amount because kizayit, you don't have to go back for chametz. You don't have to go back for an olive bulk because you have an alternative option. You can just nullify it, and therefore it's fine. Whereas basar kodesh is even a smaller amount, or maybe it's because sanctified items we're stricter about than we are with chametz. Uraminhu. Now the Gemara starts off with a contradictory source. The first source we saw, the first line in the Mishnah, if you're on your way, one of the options was to eat in a Sudat Erusin in your father-in-law's house, at an engagement meal. And then you remember you have chametz, so if you can get back, great, if not, not. Comes this source, and they say, it says here, Ha'olech le'echol Sudat Erusin bebeit chamiv, v'lishbot shvitat ha'reshut yachzor miyad. This source puts in the same category, going to an engagement party is not a mitzvah. It's like putting down your erev tchumin for some voluntary kind of act, not a mitzvah. So how do we explain this? Amar Rabbi Yochanan lo kashya harabi Yehuda harabi Yossi. It's a difference of opinion between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Ditanya, as it says in the following brayta, Sudat erusin reshut divrei Rabbi Yehuda. He thinks it's just reshut. It's not a mitzvah. Rabbi Yossi omer mitzvah. Okay, machloket, whether it's mitzvah or reshut. Comes the Gemara and they say, wait, but hashtadam Rav Chisda machloket b'suda shniya, aval b'suda rishona divrei hakol mitzvah. But wait, Rav Chisda said that they only disagree about the second meal. Apparently, there were 2 meals that they had for engagement. Unclear exactly what these are. Some people say the first meal was just the engagement. The second meal was the sovlonot, which we're going to see when the groom's family would bring gifts to the bride. So he says the machloket's only in the second meal, but the first meal, everybody agrees is a mitzvah. If that's the case, afilu tema ha Rabbi Yehuda, lo kashya ha b'suda rishona ha b'suda shniya. We could say they're both Rabbi Yehuda, but one is the first meal and one is the second. The first meal, everyone agrees is a mitzvah. That was our Mishnah. The second source is talking about the second meal. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ani lo shamati ela sudat erusin, aval lo sivlonot. Here's where we see their opinions about this. He says, I only heard about it when it's Sudat real Erusin, but not the Sovlonot, not when they give the gifts. That's not a mitzvah. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi, ani shamati Sudat Erusin v'Sivlonot. I have a tradition that it includes both meals are considered a mitzvah. Tanya. Now we're going to bring another brayta. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol Suda she'ena shel mitzvah, ein talmid chacham rashai lehenot mimena. Okay, we're going to start a very, very long tangent where the Gemara is going to start all sorts of statements. This is what we call more Agadata portions of the Gemara. Agadata has sometimes stories, but sometimes just statements about how one should act, what's valued over something else. And you might read a lot of these sources and say, whoa, what's going on here? This sounds quite harsh. But I always teach these statements in the context of this is the way the rabbis tried to tell us their values. They did it in a bit of an extreme manner, maybe because they wanted to make a point clear, or maybe because that was just the way they spoke and the lingo they used. And nowadays, particularly, we're very sensitive to language and how we speak and what we say. They weren't as sensitive about it. And they really wanted to make a statement to say, there's a hierarchy of people in terms of what's more important to spend your time doing and where you should invest your energies and where you shouldn't. And they're going to say things quite harshly, so a little bit of a warning about what's about to come, but try to think about the world of the rabbis and what they thought was the center of the world and how they tried to get that across to their people. So here goes. Any seudah that's not a seudah mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah, you shouldn't be involved in it. If you're a Talmid Chacham, now we're going to see this whole sugya is really valuing above everything the Talmid Chacham. In the world of the rabbis, someone who sat and learned was considered the most important of all. So you should not partake of them. Kigon mai. So now let's get an example. Rabbi Yochanan, kigon ba kohen liYisrael. This is going to be very radical. What is considered a seudah that's not mitzvah? You might have thought, oh, like people just having a random party, celebration for nothing, or random meal. But what does he say? No, like a wedding of, or an engagement of, a bat kohen, a daughter of a kohen to a Yisrael, okay, to an average regular person, not a kohen. Okay, this is a little bit harsh for me. I'm a bat kohen, I'm the daughter of a kohen, I married a Yisrael, not a kohen. And according to our sugya, we're going to see that that's really frowned upon. So a bat kohen l'Yisrael, it's as if you're not even, right? It's not a mitzvah to go to their meal. Ubat Talmid Chacham la'am ha'aretz. And likewise, if you have a Talmid Chacham, the daughter of a big Talmid Chacham, a wise person, and they marry an Am Ha'aretz. Now, an Am Ha'aretz is a term we're going to see throughout the daf. It's unclear, and there's many variations about how the rabbis understand what an Am Ha'aretz is. Usually it's someone you could, in the Koran, they call it an ignoramus, someone who doesn't learn. Okay, there were the people who learned and the people who don't learn. These are the people who don't learn. And some people think they're sinners. They're people who do bad things. Okay, and you'll see the way they talk about them. It does seem, you can understand why some of them first tried to explain. These are people who do seriously bad things because wait, this isn't so bad to begin with, but wait to see what's to come. Bat Kohen Yisrael ein zivugan ole yafeh. Okay, this is why I got a little bit offended, but it says here, a Bat Kohen who marries a regular Yisrael, not a Kohen, ein zivugan ole yafeh. Their marriage is not going to work out. Maihi, what's going to happen? Rav Chisda, almana, o grusha, o zera enla. One of three options. Either she'll be widowed, or she'll get divorced, or she won't end up with any offspring. This sounds very radical. I'm going to show you Rashi quotes the verses where they learn this from. It talks about who is allowed to eat the truma, and the daughter of a Kohen can eat truma until she gets married. And now it says, and if she marries a Kohen, she could still continue to eat truma. But if she doesn't, and it says, Uba Kohen ki tiyeh leish zar, I'm in Vayikra, Perikav bet pasuk yud bet. If she goes to an ish zar, not a Kohen, he betchumat hakodashim lo tochal, she can't eat the truma. Ubat kohen ki tiyeh, and if a bat kohen becomes an almana ugrusha v'zera enla, if then she gets widowed, divorced, or doesn't have any children, and she goes back to her father's house, v'sha el beit avia kin ureha, milechem avia tochal v'chozar lo yochel. In the end, she can go back and eat in her father's house if one of those following things happens. Well, what is the Gemara darshan from this? Well, if she ends up with an ish zar, what will happen to her? What happens in the second verse? She'll end up widowed, divorced, without children. Okay, pretty strong language here. B'manita Tana, in the Braita it says kovra o kovarto. A different thing will happen. Either he'll bury her, or she'll bury him, o miviato lidev aniut, or she's going to bring him poverty. Basically, it's saying a Bat Kohen should not marry Yisrael, and Yisrael shouldn't marry a Bat Kohen. Ini, is this really true? But wait, there's contradictory statements. Now, when we start to get into statements like this, we often find contradictory statements because this isn't halacha per se. This is perceptions of people of the way society should be, the hierarchies, who should marry who. It's not such a clear-cut thing. So they say here, doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say, and by the way, Rabbi Yochanan was the one who said, so even if you say there's different opinions, Rabbi Yochanan was the one who said, like a Bat Kohen to Yisrael. And here it says, but didn't Rabbi Yochanan say, if you want to get wealthy, you should stick to Kohanim, meaning you should marry Kohanim in the Kohen family. And all the more so, Torah and Kahuna together. So if you're a Talmid Chacham and you marry a Bat Kohen, that's the best union possible. The wealth will come from the Kohen's family. And it's interesting that they thought Kohanim was associated with wealth, because remember, they didn't have their own land, but they thought it would bring a blessing of wealth. And the Torah also. So this is all good all around. So how can you explain that if Rabbi Yochanan said you shouldn't marry a Kohen? So lo kashya haba Talmid Chacham haba am haaretz. It's different. A Talmid Chacham and a Kohen, it's good, even though it's a Yisrael. But an am haaretz with a Kohen, that's more of a problem. Rabbi Yeshua, Nasiv Kahanta. Now we're going to see some stories of people who married Benot Kohen, and let's see what happened to them. Chalash, he got weak. Now here you have a Talmid Chacham who married a Bat Kohen, Rabbi Yeshua. He was pretty up there in terms of prominent Talmidei Chachamim. Amar, he said when he got sick, he said, Lo nichale la'aharon de'id bak b'zareh. It seems Aharon was not very happy that I married into his family. Because he ended up with a chatan like me, he wasn't very happy. It's interesting because Rabbi Yeshua was a big Talmid Chacham. To think that he thought badly of himself, right? And he thought when he got sick, he saw it as a sign from God, is interesting. It could be, by the way, if you think about it psychologically, he was in the story of Rabban Gamliel, and Rabban Gamliel offended him, right? It embarrassed him 3 times. And could be that had impact on his self-esteem. And because of that, he had low self-esteem. And he said this about himself. Rav Idi bar Avin, Nasib Kanta, a different story with a different kind of approach. He married a bat kohen. Nafka umene tre b'nei smicha. He ended up with 2 children who got smicha, who became ordained as rabbis. Rav Sheshet bered Rav Idi, Rav Yeshua bered Rav Idi. 2 sons of his became rabbis. Amar Rav Papa, ilo nisimna kahanta lo atare. Rav Papa says, if I hadn't married a daughter of a kohen, I would never have gotten as wealthy as I did. Amar Rav Kahana, ilo nisimna kahanta lo galai. If I hadn't married a daughter of a kohen, I never would have ended up in exile. Okay, he talks about it as a negative. So we started negative, we got 2 positives, now we have a negative again. So he never would have ended up being exiled. Where was he exiled? Interestingly, he was exiled from Babylonia to Israel. Okay, there's a whole story about how the authorities exiled him. I have to remember the story. Where is it? 1 second. Saw it here. Maybe Rashi says it. No, he doesn't seem to say it. Quickly, I'll check. So it's a Gemara in Baba Kama that says that Rav Kahana once killed a Jew in order to prevent him from turning over money to the authorities, to the Gentile authorities, and basically they wanted to. It's a bit of a crazy story. We'll have to look at it inside there. I didn't open it up and look inside. It's on Baba Kama Kuf Yud Zayin if you want to look it up. And he basically runs away to Israel. And he basically claims that the reason he ran away to Israel must have been a punishment for him for having married the daughter of a Kohen. So that's an interesting story. So they say to him, what do you mean? You're talking, you went exiled to Israel? What do you mean? That's a place of Torah. That's not a bad exile. Lo gilai kidigale inashe. So he says, I didn't go to exile the way other people went, meaning other people went to Israel because they wanted to go. I was chased away. I look at that as a punishment. Interesting statement about, some people end up in Israel because they were running away from something, right? That's different than people who go with their own, right, on their own volition. If you enjoy having all these meals, in the end, that's where we started. We're going to go back to this again. If you end up with enjoying these big festive meals that have nothing to do with any sort of mitzvah, in the end, you're going to end up in exile. Okay, you're eating lambs of the flock or fattened lambs, and the calves from the stall. It seems like you're just eating them right away. These are psukim from Amos, and then it says you're going to end up going to exile. These are people who eat too much good food. Tanu Rabbanan, kol tamid chacham harabes sudato b'chol makom. If you're a tamid chacham, you like to learn, but in the end, you have a lot of meals. You like to eat good meals in all different places. Sof machrivit beito, what's going to happen? You're going to destroy your house. Then ma'almenet ishto, your wife's going to become widowed. Me'atemet goes alav, your children are going to become orphans. V'tamidom ishtakach mimenu, and you're teaching everything you learn is going to be forgotten. Again, there's many interpretations of these lines. It seems, I think the one that made the most sense to me is you're going to end up going searching for food everywhere or running after money. You're never going to be home. You're going to basically ruin your relationship with your wife, ruin your relationship with your children. It'll be as if she's widowed because you're never around, as if your children are orphans because you're not at home. And you're going to forget your Torah because you're going to be so focused on trying to chase after money and food. You're going to end up fighting with people. This is, maybe you'll get drunk. And when you get drunk, you get into fights. No one's going to end up listening to you. You're going to disgrace the name of God. It's going to have bad ramifications on your rabbi and your father. People say, look at their child, look at their student. And all your future generations will be destroyed, right? Their name will have a bad reputation. Right? This is one of those things that one thing causes another. Again, it's a bit extreme, but they're trying to say, watch out and beware of the ramifications of your actions. Mahi. So what is this like? Amrabai karile bar machem tanuri. They call a person like this a guy who warms his oven because his oven is always warm because he always needs food. Rav Amar bar merakebe kube. It's the guy who dances in the inns because he's always dancing and getting drunk. Rav Pap Amar bar melachech pinche. The guy who licks the bowls, right? Because he's always eating. Rav Shmai Amar bar mach rava. It's the guy who folds his clothes and sleeps on them. And as you don't even bother going home, you're so tired or drunk that you just sleep where you are. Tanu Rabbanit. Another statement. Now we're going into the more positive, what you should do. Okay, you should try to Sell everything you have in order to marry the daughter of a Talmid Chacham. Do whatever you can, basically, to do that. She'im met o golem muvtach lo shabanav talmidei chachamim. If something were to happen to you, you die or you go to exile, at least you're promised that your future will be promising, your children will be talmidei chachamim. But don't marry an Ama'aretz, a woman who's the daughter of an Ama'aretz, because if you die, your sons will become Ama'aretz. This is an interesting thing. It's kind of saying whoever you marry is going to determine, and many people say this, right, what your children are going to be like, because the woman's the one at home giving the strength to the children. And, especially in those days, the woman was home. And therefore their perception was, make sure who you marry, that will affect your future generations. Tanu Rabbanan, another same statement. Go marry the daughter of a Talmid Chacham. And you should marry your daughter off to a Talmid Chacham. Mashal, and this is a famous song that people sing at weddings. Mashal le'imvei hagefen be'imvei hagefen. Davar ne'eh u'mitkabel. It's like taking vine, a beautiful vine with another beautiful vine and intertwining them. That's the idea of taking a Talmid Chacham and marrying them off to another child of a Talmid Chacham. And that's a davar ne'eh, it's a beautiful thing, u'mitkabel, and it's accepted. V'lo yisa bat ama'aretz, but not the daughter of an ama'aretz. Mashal le'imvei hagefen be'imvei hasneh. It's like taking beautiful vine with a prickly bush. Davar ka'ol ve'eno mitkabel. That's something ugly and not acceptable. It won't become, people won't like when they hear it, Rashi says, l'shom'im. It's not acceptable to those who hear. Like when people hear Talmid Chacham married a Talmid Chacham, oh wow, everybody gets excited, right? Obviously in those days it was more the daughter of a Talmid Chacham, not one in her own right, but also it would apply, I assume, also to a woman in her own right who was a Talmidah Chachama. Tanu, right, that's obviously not what the Gemara is referring to, but one could explain it that way too. Tanu Rabbanan, Lo'olam yimkor adam kol ma sheyesh lo, again the same line, sell everything you can, v'yisa bat Talmid Chacham, and marry the daughter of a Talmid Chacham. Now here, again, why do we keep repeating this? Because each one goes a little bit in a different direction after that first line. Lo matzah bat Talmid Chacham. Now we're going to have hierarchy. What's the most important to the least important? So if you can't find a bat Talmid Chacham, yisa bat gedolei hador. Find someone great in the generation. Right? It's interesting. Talmid Chacham is first, someone great in the generation. I assume that means someone who's a community person. Lo matzah bat gedolei hador. In other words, a big community person. If you can't find someone like that, yisa bat rashei knesiot. Someone who's in charge of the gathering places, like a local community leader rather than a bigger community leader. Lo matzah bat rashei knesiot. If you can't find someone like that, yisa bat gaba'et tzedakah. Go for the ones who collect tzedakah. They're very trustworthy. Lo matzat bat gaba'et tzedakah, yisa bat milamdei tinokot. Go for the ones who teaches the young children, right? The children are not considered as high on the list. What's interesting here is that we make a big jump from the milamdei tinokot, right? Which you would have thought that's also a respectable job, the teachers, but they seem to be at the very bottom, just above. V'lo yisa bat ama'aretz, but never marry the daughter of a me'aretz. Mipnei shehem sheketz, they're a disgrace. Unushotehem sheretz, and their wives are like creepy crawly creatures. And it's like sleeping with an animal if you sleep with their daughters. Okay, this is, as I said, we're going to hear some things that are very, very harsh. Okay, maybe you didn't think until now it was too harsh. Here's to come the very harsh statements against Amei Haaretz. And so first of all, we have the issue that there's a huge gap between the Melamdei Tinokot and maybe those are all the people that are respected. Then it kind of skips everyone in the middle who's okay. Like, they don't mention business people and other things, but maybe they're in the middle. And then we get to the rock bottom, but don't go with the Amei Haaretz. Tanya, another brighter. Rebbe Omer, Amei Haaretz asor le'echol basar. If you're an Amei Haaretz, you can't eat meat. Why? Shenehemar, zot Torah habehema v'ha'of. What do we learn from that? Torah means these are the rules, but they learn about Torah. Again, here I said it's Amei Haaretz, it's not so clear. Is it someone who doesn't learn, or is it someone who does really bad things? Seems here that they're saying someone who doesn't learn. It's like the opposite of a Talmid Chacham. Talmid Chacham is someone who spends their time learning. Now, Amei Haaretz is someone who doesn't know anything. Can't eat meat because you don't know how to shech. You don't know all the laws. It's very complicated, all the laws of slaughtering and eating kosher animals. And therefore, kol osek b'Torah mutar le'echol basar behema va'of. They darshan it from the pasuk zot Torah behema va'of, which is really, these are the laws. But they learn, Torah, and then you can eat. If you learn Torah, you can eat animals and birds. But if not, but if you don't, you can't eat them at all. Again, we don't hold this way, lahalacha. But again, it's the rabbi's way of saying you should really spend your time learning Torah. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Ama Aretz, here comes the real harsh line. Mutar lenochro b'yom kippurim shechal liot b'Shabbat. We started with Pesach, Erev Pesach, that's on Shabbat. Now we say, what if Yom Kippurim is on Shabbat, which is the most severe of severe days? It's both Yom Kippur and it's Shabbat. You can stab Ama Aretz on that day. Okay, what are we doing? Stabbing people, right? What on earth are we talking about? So some people think it's if they're on their way to do a terrible thing. Then you can stab them, basically. But other people don't understand it that way. And then you have to, again, it's a way of saying they're really bad people. And it's just saying it in an extreme way. It doesn't really mean this literally. Amrulo Tamidav, Rebbe, Emor l'shachto. If you think you can stab him, why don't you say you can slaughter him? A lot more blood comes out when you slaughter someone, right? You cut their neck rather than just stab them. So why don't you say that? It's a bit of a strange question that they're asking. Amar lahem, zeh te'um bracha, v'zeh eino te'um bracha. The answer is even more strange. Well, when you slaughter an animal, you make a blessing, ala shchita. So here also, maybe you would have to make a blessing, and we don't want you to make a blessing on it. That doesn't need a bracha, so you may as well, so you should stab it and not slaughter it, because slaughtering would necessarily imply that you might have to make a bracha, and we don't want you to make a bracha on this. It's quite a strange line, needs more understanding why exactly we're bringing up bracha in the context of stabbing someone, and why on earth are we stabbing someone on on Yom Kippur, which is on Shabbat. And just because they're an ignoramus, it doesn't sound like the right thing to do. But as I said, there's different interpretations. The one that makes the most sense is that maybe they're on their way to do something bad, even though it doesn't say that. Oh, by the way, some people say that, and we'll get to this now. Maybe I'll read this and then I'll kind of go back and reinterpret. You can't walk with him somewhere if you're going somewhere. Why? Like there was always this concern if you go on a trip, it's always dangerous. So don't go with an Ama Aretz because that, right? You're supposed to keep yourself alive. If you're with him, he doesn't care about his own life. So he's certainly not going to care about yours. So don't go with him in a dangerous place. If he doesn't care about his own life, right? He's not going to care about yours, and it's going to make your trip, potentially more dangerous. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ama Aretz mutar lekor'o kedag. You can tear him open like a fish. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak umi gabo. You can even do it from his back, which makes him die even quicker. Again, this strange lines about killing Ama Aretz. Wait till you get to the next line. It's even more strange. But right now, I just wanted to point out one thing, that there's this concept that the Ama Aretz don't care about their own lives. What does it mean they don't care about their own lives? If they cared about their own lives, they take action and they'd start learning. The fact that they don't learn shows they don't really care about their own lives. If that's the case, then it makes sense what we said about mutar l'nechol. Maybe the opinion that they're basically killing themselves by them not keeping with the way of God. That's another way of basically committing suicide almost, right? And that they're almost stabbing themselves, even though, again, doesn't really seem to say they're stabbing themselves, but they're saying that you can kill them, which basically maybe is saying in some sort of way that they're killing themselves. But again, this raises more questions than answers. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Akiva. If you remember the story about Rabbi Akiva, for 40 years, he didn't keep Torah and mitzvot, and then he all of a sudden comes to God, right? He realizes and he starts to learn. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Shayiti Ama Aretz, before I was 40, some people think this is even an earlier stage of his life, but we'll talk about it in a minute. Amarti, mi yiten li talmid chacham va'anashchenu kechamor. If somebody will bring me a talmid chacham, I will bite him like a snake. Okay, what does this show? This shows how much animosity there was between the Amei Aretz and the Talmidei Chachamim. And some people even say there was so much animosity between the Talmidei Chachamim and the Amei Aretz that it caused the Amei Aretz also to hate the Talmidei Chachamim, because the Talmidei Chachamim were so down on them. It caused the opposite reaction, that the Amei Aretz hated the Talmidei Chachamim. You would think that if that were the case, he would understand when he became a Talmid Chacham and would tone down people's statements, right? Unclear why he's saying this. Maybe he's trying to tell the rabbis, look what you're causing. Amrulo Talmidav, Lebi, Amor Kekelev. So why bite like a snake? Why don't you say bite like a dog? I'm sorry, not like a snake. I said it wrong. And Eshchenu Kechamor, like a donkey. I translated that wrong. I was just thinking Lenashech, like a snake. And Eshchenu Kechamor, like a donkey. So he says, why did you say like a donkey? Why didn't you say like a dog? Amar lahen, zon noshech v'shover etzem. If a donkey bites, it breaks the bones. V'zen noshech ve'ino shover etzem. But if a dog bites, it doesn't break any bones. So I meant the real severe one. Tanya, another statement. Haya Rabbi Meir Omer, kol hamesi bito la'ama aretz ki'ilu kofta u'menicha lefnei ha'ari. If you marry your daughter off to an ama aretz, it's like putting her before a lion. This is very harsh also. Ma'ari dores v'ochel ve'en lo boshet panim. What does a lion do? Captures its prey, eats it, and has no shame. Af ha'ma'aretz makeh u'bo'el ve'en lo boshet panim. Likewise, an ha'ma'aretz will beat his wife, sleep with her, and have no shame at all. If we didn't need them for business, they would kill us. This doesn't make a lot of sense. It sounds like they would kill us if they needed us. So some people explain it means if we didn't need them for business purposes, we would be even more mean to them, and then they would really kill us. But because we need them for business, so we kind of have to be nicer to them. Tana Rabbi, even though after all those statements, they don't really seem like they're being so nice to them. Tana Rabbi Chia, kol osek b'Torah lifnei ha'ma'aretz ki'ilu bo'el arusato b'fanav. Anyone who learns Torah in front of an ha'ma'aretz is like sleeping with his engaged wife in front of him. Okay, what's the idea here? Shene'emar Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha al tekchei morasha ela ma'orasa. It's saying that the Torah is our inheritance, but the word inheritance sounds like morasa, engaged. It's like the Torah is engaged, betrothed to us, and therefore, by you learning Torah in front, it's like making fun of him. Oh, I learned Torah and you don't. Okay, here's a different kind of statement that, they don't learn Torah, but you should be careful not to flaunt it. Wow, this is really harsh. The hatred of the Amei Haaretz for the rabbis, those who learn, is stronger than the hatred of the Gentiles to the Jews. Unishotehen yoter mihen. Okay, and their wives even more so. Tana, Shana u'peresh yoter mikulan. Okay, so the Tana says that Talmidei Chachamim, right? 1 second. Talmid sheshana u'peresh min haTorah, Rashi says, v'yodea kama Talmidei Chachamim miginim et Amei Haaretz, kama hem shvelim beinehem, sonei yoter mikulan. What they're saying here is that someone who learned and then left it is even worse. They hate them even more. Okay, so we have the Amei Haaretz are the worst. We have their wives are even worse than them, how much they hate the rabbis. And then we have that anyone who started learning and then leaves that world hates them even more. Okay, another statement. Tana Rabbanan. Shisha dvarim ne'amru b'amei haaretz. 6 things about them. Laws. Ein mosrin lahem edut. Don't invite them to be your witness for something. Ein mekabelim mimenu edut. You shouldn't accept testimony from them. There's a difference between you asking them to be your witness, and then also once they've seen something, we don't accept their testimony, meaning they're not trustworthy. Ve'em megalim lahem sod. You can't give them any secrets, tell them any secrets. Ve'em emanim otam b'tropos al yitomim. You can't give them to be in charge of orphans' money. Ve'em emanim otam b'tropos al kupat shel tzedakah. You can't put them in charge of tzedakah money. The assumption here, we're talking, like we'll get to in Sanhedrin, about people who can't testify, people who are suspect that they're going to take money for things and that they might steal money in these kind of situations. And don't go on the path with them, as we saw previously. Some people say you don't even have to return their lost item to them. This is quite strange. If it's theirs and they lost it, what are we talking about? So the rabbis again try to say, maybe we don't really mean that. Maybe we mean that it was in a group of people that was Amei Haaretz. We're not exactly sure whose it is. Maybe it means that you just don't have to try to find out if it's his or not, or other kind of possibilities. The Tanna Kama, who doesn't say that you don't have to return it, but does think you have to return their lost item, maybe someone in the future, good will come out of him, and therefore you should return it because maybe it'll go into somebody's hands who's a good person. Okay, back to the Mishnah. We talked about the same rules for chametz, if you can remember where we started. Same rules for chametz also about going back home to burn your chametz. Same thing about if you took sanctified items out of the temple. So, Rabbi Meir Savar. Now we ended with these shiurim. Rabbi Yehuda said both are kezayin, and Rabbi Meir said they're both kebetza. So, you want to say that Rabbi Meir Savar kebetzahu the chashiv, and Rabbi Yehuda Savar kezayin nami chashiv. In other words, Rabbi Meir said it's not important unless it's a kebetza. And Rabbi Yehuda says even if it's a kezayin. But that contradicts something we learned elsewhere. Rumini. Ad kamei mizamnin. How much do you need to make a zimun to bench? Ad kezayit. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad kebetza. Their opinions are exactly the opposites. It can't be that Rabbi Yehuda thinks a kezayit's already significant because he holds kebetza when it comes to benching, and Rabbi Meir the reverse. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'chlefet hashita. He says you have to switch them in one of the places. It must be they match up perfectly. Abai Amar laolam lo tepuch. No, don't switch them. Hacha b'kai plige, hacha b'svara plige. In one case, they're arguing over verses in the Torah. In the other, they're arguing over logic. Hata b'krai plige when it comes to benching. Rabbi Meir savar v'achalta zo achila. Vis savata zo shia. When it says you should eat, be satiated, then you bench. Eat is food. Satiated is drinking. And therefore, achila is just eating, and that's kizayit. Rabbi Yehuda savar v'achalta v'savata. It's only achila sheyesh ba kedei sviya. You're not satiated if you only ate a kizayit. So when it comes to benching, it's unique. You need specifically a kibetza. Ve'ezo kibetza, ve'ezo v'chabetza, right? What is kedei sviya? That's a kibetza. And hacha b'svara kamiflege. Here they argue over logic. Rabbi Meir savar chazarato ketumato. Ma tumato b'kibetza, af chazarato b'kibetza. So Rabbi Meir says, you have to go back the same way. You have to go back if your item was disqualified. It's the same laws for impurity. And impurity, what have we learned many, many times? Impurity, the size is the kibetza. So he says it's the same as that. And Rabbi Yehuda savar kazarato ki isuro. No, it's just like if it were a puzzle piece of meat, how much would be problematic if you ate it? Ma isuro b'kazayit, af chazarato b'kazayit. So therefore, the isur is kazayit, therefore also bringing it back would be the size of a kazayit. Okay, with that, we finish for now. Shavua tov or Shabbat shalom to everybody. We'll pick up on Sunday.